What would be your Turing test? What would be the test that if a machine passes it, we'd say now the machine has equal rights to a human?
Okay, so does everyone know what the Turing test is? Right. So Alan Turing, even before we had started to build AI, thought about what it would be to say that a machine could think, and proposed this idea of a Turing test that when you couldn't tell a machine apart from a human, then you might as well say that the machine thinks. I mean, the first thing to say is that people working in AI don't think about passing the Turing test. I mean, it's more what in Germany we call a Gedanken experiment, right? It's a thought experiment. Well, what would it mean? As opposed to, there is this thing, every year there's the Loebner Prize that is a Turing-like test that's applied, but most people in AI aren't working towards solving the Loebner Prize or thinking that that's, most of us are working on just some small part of AI that will one day be integrated into the whole. And increasingly, you're not going to notice. I mean, Andrew Ning, who used to be the chief scientist at Baidu, says that AI is going to be like electricity. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to power. So everywhere you go, electricity powers everything. It powers the light in this room. It's powering the TV camera. It's powering this microphone. It's giving you all the data on your computer. So not only is it providing power, it's also the carrier for the data. It's integral to our lives today. And AI is going to be like that. Everywhere you go, AI is going to be there. It's going to be part of your life. Every room you walk into, you'll say, room, what's on my schedule today? And even though this is a room that you haven't been in before, the room will recognize your voice, biometrically authenticate you to check your schedule, and then will tell you, and then you say, who won the football? And the room will know which football team you follow to say, which match it was and which team in that match won. AI is going to follow you around your life, and you won't even know it will be such an integral part of your life. AI will eventually be, of course, the operating system of your computer. Right? You can already see the beginnings of that. AI now is becoming, you're having more of a conversation with computers. As the history of operating systems is it went from, you literally plugging wires into computers to writing bits of machine code to Windows and typing things in Windows. The next level is going to be you have a conversation. You say to the computer, find out, when my wife is going to be home tonight.
Yeah.
So eventually, you're not going to notice it's AI. In fact, I actually think we're going to run into a problem, which is that we'll be interacting with things and we won't know whether they're people or computers.
My question was a bit different. I think maybe I probably didn't word it correctly. It's more about when does an AI, when does it become unethical to turn off an AI?
Okay, well that is another dimension to this question. I mean, we have no idea. We certainly don't build machines that have any sort of sentience or consciousness, any sort of feelings or emotions. Maybe machines will clearly have to understand emotions. Right? If we're going to spend more and more of our lives interacting with machines, they'll need to understand our emotions. So they're going to have to be able to have a better emotional intelligence they have today. Maybe we'll even give them emotions. Maybe those will be fake emotions. We don't know. We don't really understand enough about
what are real emotions.
What are real emotions, right? Well, I mean, we do understand a little bit about emotions. They're chemical. Yeah.
But
right?
How is that different from code that gets executed?
Right, but so maybe we have to give a chemical aspect to machines so that they have things like emotions. Emotions are clearly really important. They're a big part of our lives, right? We wake up, we are emotional. Evolution has equipped us with emotions, and they seem to serve some useful purpose. They help us make decisions quickly and so on. So maybe we'll end up giving machines emotions, or maybe we'll end up giving machines fake emotions. We don't know whether they'll be real emotions. We don't know whether they'll be conscious. I mean, your question comes down also to this idea of consciousness. We have no idea. It's about one of the most unsolved questions in science today. What is consciousness? And the interesting thing is, will it be an emergent phenomenon when we build sufficiently complex AIs? We don't know. Maybe it will, or maybe they will be, as David Chalmers, the philosopher, has said, there'll be just zombie intelligence. it will be intelligence like Spock. It will be incredibly smart, but have no emotional content to it. And there's no necessity, it seems. We have no reason to suppose the necessity that the AIs we build will have any consciousness or any emotions. They may be just really good decision makers without any of that emotions and consciousness. But consciousness seems to be a really important part of our lives. And maybe, that's integral to being able to behave ethically. You have to be conscious. You wake up from the moment you're awake to the moment you fall asleep. It's the thing that defines your existence and your intelligence is your consciousness. So maybe we will end up building consciousness into machines, or maybe they will become conscious. We don't know. I mean, that's one of the interesting things of studying AI, is that maybe it will help us answer this question and tell us something about ourselves. But maybe people forget when we talk about AI, that AI means artificial intelligence. And people focus on the intelligence as opposed to the artificial. And it's actually, for better or worse, it's quite a good name, because it may be that we build intelligence that's very artificial, very different to our natural intelligence, that looks very different. It doesn't have consciousness, it doesn't have emotions. It's a very different type of intelligence.
It's a very interesting way of interpreting artificial. I've never thought about it that way.
And so, that's why AI is so interesting. I mean, the next 50 years is going to help answer these fundamental questions, which is much about us, about our consciousness, our emotional lives, as it is about our machines. And there's a good side effect, is we'll have these smart machines that can do all these things for us, do all our work. And so it's a great question that leads into lots of issues.
Okay. AI is creating content for the social media. It's creating ads and so on. It's choosing for us the best social media content. So it's optimized for usage time, I would say, in Facebook, YouTube, and so on. It's creating ads and optimizing them for clicks and conversions. How do you think that the society's opinion is changed by these optimizations?
I think we really have to start worrying about this, that if we used to think that the internet was going to be this open environment that facilitated discussion and so on, but now we're starting to worry that we're living in these echo chambers where it reinforces the things that we want to hear, allows very extreme views to gain currency, and who is responsible? It seems to me it's absurd that we discover Facebook's rules for censoring because of the Guardian's investigative reporting. They are today the biggest news provider on the planet, and yet we had no say. There's no society's say about the rules that govern the freedom of speech on Facebook. It was only by chance, by them investigating and leaking the private rules that they use, that we discover what norms are being applied and whether they are our norms or not. I mean, we have, as a society, agreed on various things about promoting racism, about neo-Nazism, about inciting hatred and things like this. We have various norms, and there are different norms in different societies. And yet Facebook is applying its own rules, which may not align with those norms. And quite honestly, I think we've been giving Silicon Valley too much of a free ride. That they have responsibilities, and they need to be responsible, and our governments are not regulating them enough. It was, when some of this fake news controversy started at the end of last year, Facebook's immediate response was, we're just an intermediary. We're not responsible. Later on, in January, Mark Zuckerberg wrote his letter where he put his hand up and said, okay, we'll take some responsibility for this. But that was that wasn't their initial reaction. And it disappoints me that we're only getting to this beginning of these conversations. And interestingly enough, though, in his letter, he talks about, well, how are we going to tackle this? Some of it is by human sensors, but that's challenging because these people get exposed to material which actually, may even hurt them. Damn it, they end up with, trauma from having seen some of all this material. But also just to do it on the scale, planet-wide scale that Facebook works in, the only way they can do it, and this is what the letter says, is by using AI. So not only are we part of the problem, but we're also part of the cure again, which is the only way you can hope to be able to try and filter information at the speed that it's coming into Facebook and YouTube and places like this is if you use AI to do the filtering for you. So we're also part of the cure as well as part of the problem. But I think these are really important questions about, about society, about our values, and about how technology companies have a responsibility, and we are not actually, I think, holding technology companies enough to account. It's not just Tesla. I mean, I was rude about Tesla in the talk, but I think I could be rude about Facebook. I could be rude about Google. They are having a huge impact upon our lives, and they're unanswerable. These are corporations that are as wealthy as small countries these days. And they're not behaving responsibly. They're not paying taxes. They're not supporting the countries in which their wealth is being generated. It is not at all clear to me that their values align with society's. They're trying to maximize shareholder profit. That is not necessarily the same as agreeing with the norms that we as a society want to make our societies more open, more prosperous, more healthy, more free. It doesn't seem that those necessarily line up.
Thank you.
Hello. Thank you for the great talk. Actually, I have a question about autonomous driving and accountability. So you were talking about the first death in an autonomous driving car.
One of the first deaths. There's possibly a death in China that happened just before.
Oh.
That they don't know. It was so violent an accident. The black box on the car doesn't know actually whether it was an autopilot or not. So a Chinese person, it looks like it probably was, because it drove into the back of a street cleaning truck that was on the side of the road. Oh. Killed the Chinese youth who had borrowed the car from his father.
All right, but I think my question still is, who is actually accountable in that case? So it seemed in your talk that the driver was actually accounted for because the driver made a mistake. He was watching, I think, Harry Potter movies or something on his...
They think.
I think everybody, yeah, maybe. But if you go to, like, in the pharmaceutical area, usually people have to test drugs if they have any kind of lethal side effect. Everybody has a very clearly defined responsibility on what he has to do. And I think, in your honest opinion, who do you think is accountable in this case? Is it Tesla, is it the car, or is it the driver?
So Tesla's lawyers will say the driver was responsible.
Of course.
Right? They would say that when he started the car in the morning, he pressed the OK button on, which gave approval for the autopilot to take over, and that he would keep his hands on the wheel. But everyone knows that you can't expect people to pay attention for long periods of time unless they have to do something. There's a long-going debate in the airline industry about increasingly the cockpit is automated, and pilots who are trained individuals who are paid to be there struggle to maintain awareness of what the plane is doing, given that most of the time the computer's flying the plane. And they're really struggling with this issue, which is that how can you take back control at short notice if you haven't been driving the car? Previously on a car, it wasn't a matter. We did have systems like cruise control, where the computer was in charge, but you still had to drive, so you had to still pay most of the attention, so you were still focused on the driving. Once you stop having to focus on the driving, then there's a real argument, which is that you can't expect humans to take back control at short notice. There are these different levels of automation that go from level 0, no automation, up to full automation level 5, and we're at level 3, moving into level 4. And there's an argument which says you can't have level 3 or level 4. You have to go straight to 5. You can't expect humans to be able to take back control. Tesla is being irresponsible to expect human drivers to pay attention when they've got nothing to do for half an hour. And I think there's quite a lot of validity to that argument. There's also a validity to the argument, which is that okay, maybe they can argue that the human driver has responsibility because they sign the release, they click the button. But when they kill, as they will do invariably, a pedestrian or a cyclist, that pedestrian or cyclist won't have any agreement with Tesla. right? And for example, cyclists are the most vulnerable people today are in autonomous cars. You talk to people who build autonomous cars and they say it's really difficult to work out, they're really difficult to work out which way a bicycle's going even, right? Because bicycles go the wrong way down streets, surprisingly enough. So just because they're on a one-way street doesn't mean they're going the right way down the one-way street. So bicyclists are very unpredictable. They're also very hard to see because they're small objects, there's small radar signal. So invariably they're going to kill a cyclist before too long. They're going to turn left, as drivers do. And they will kill a cyclist who didn't, has no agreement with Tesla. So I think, these companies are behaving irresponsibly. And another reason, in the airline industry, well, when airlines started flying, it was really dangerous. 100 years ago, when airlines were, planes fell out of the sky, it was very dangerous. But we made it the safest form of travel. We instigated various mechanisms to make sure it is now the safest form of travel. If there's an accident, it gets investigated. The NTSC or whoever comes in and investigates it and finds the cause, so that the systems can be changed, the hardware can be fixed, or the procedures that pilots follow can be changed so the accident never gets repeated. And then that information is shared with the whole industry, not with just one company, not with Boeing, but with everyone. Everyone gets to learn from the improvements. Whereas what you see today with autonomous cars, it's a race. No one wants to share any information with anyone else, right? And they're not being forced to share the information so that what Tesla learns is not shared with Ford or Toyota or Uber or anyone else. Again, I think governments are being irresponsible because it's a $1 trillion industry, car industry, and there's a race to be the winners of that industry. It's not necessarily the car companies of the future are not necessarily Ford, General Motors, and Toyota. It might be Apple, Google, and Uber. And so there's a race to win this industry, and government is reluctant to regulate where it should be regulating, so that it will be the safest form of travel.
Thank you for your talk and this session. One of your concerns during the talk was this bias, racial bias, sex bias, and I don't fully agree with this idea of we will inherit the bias from society when we build machine learning systems, because it should be fairly simple or easy to remove this bias if we agree beforehand on the bias that we shouldn't have in our society. For example, male or female, we could easily remove that from a machine learning algorithm. So my question is if you could elaborate a bit more on that and how what is the real danger of using historical data if we can easily remove that from our systems?
How do I tell that? Sorry.
Yeah, my point is I believe that we could use machine intelligence for some sort of decisions, exactly because machines shouldn't have this bias by default. Like they shouldn't bring this racial bias, for example.
So you're right in theory. We can write programs to be less biased than humans. Because, as I was talking to Peter Norvig last week, his head of research at Google, and he was saying, humans are terrible decision makers. We are. We're full of all implicit biases, and we can't explain our decision making. So there's no reason. I mean, there are a number of challenges though. We don't know how to build algorithms that can explain themselves. They're black boxes. The machine learning algorithms we have at the moment are pretty much black boxes, so they can't explain their decision making. They can't explain why they came up with particular decisions. So that's one of the challenges. The second is that we haven't worked out as a society what these biases, what we mean to be fair yet. We're only starting to think about these questions, right? So you say, well, we can eliminate the racial bias in policing, right, in sentencing. Well, we don't know what that really means. I mean, you can say, well, if we look at the data, we can say that people black people commit more crime, which might be true. They might commit more crime because they're poor. Crime is often just a reflection of poverty, right? Or they might commit more crime because they don't have access to mental health facilities. Crime is also largely a function of largely if you go to prisons, they're a substitute for mental health hospitals. So we might be, just reflecting the fact that these people don't get access to mental health care.
But if we agree
But we haven't agreed as a society.
Exactly, but if we agree that the race shouldn't be a factor for the machine learning algorithm, we could easily remove that factor from the decision, and make it absolutely uniform across race, across sex, across.
No, so the challenge is
the challenge is agreeing.
The challenge is if it's just one dimension, then it's easy. Then sure, we can say, okay, we've got one parameter, sex, or income, and we can remove bias with one parameter. But then when you say, well, okay, well, we've got multiple parameters, we've got that we want to remove bias against. We want to remove bias against sex and gender at the same time. Now it becomes much more challenging to define, well, what does that mean? We don't know, we haven't really worked out yet what that means. And we haven't worked out as a society what that means. So we have to have a conversation so there's both a technical question of if we've got multiple dimensions that we're trying to remove bias on at the same time, is that actually possible? And it will probably, I suspect, we'll actually discover there are some fundamental impossibilities. If we try to remove bias in one dimension, it may bias the other dimension. And so we may have to trade off one against the other. And then secondly is we haven't worked out as a society what we really want when there's multiple parameters in play. But we're beginning to have those conversations. And when we have those conversations, but so far we've been sold this idea, Google have sold us this idea, algorithms are unbiased. Search results are unbiased. They're not. And they're paying $1 billion fine for the consequence of that at the moment. Algorithms can be just as biased as humans. Depends on the input, it depends on the training data, it depends on many things that may be implicit or explicit in how they're designed and how they're implemented. Yeah. But so far we've been trusting algorithms blindly without thinking, well, wait a second, maybe there are some biases that actually reflect poverty or mental health, access to mental health, that we don't want to have, we don't want to perpetuate because we just train off the data that has that bias in it. But so these are both technical questions and societal questions, and I think as a society we have to start having these questions. What do we want? What does it mean for it to be unbiased? We've only just beginning to have those sorts of conversations. But already there are algorithms making decisions about sentencing. Which seems to be, the horse is behind the cart there.
Hi, I had a small follow-up question to the one about autonomous driving. And I guess when you hear the Tesla story, the first thing you think about is why aren't we working on a combination of computer and human and having them work together rather than try and replace one with the other? Or although I guess maybe in some ways that's quite naive because we are training these models using humans in the beginning to make some of the decisions.
Well, there's going to be huge benefits when we have fully autonomous cars.
Yeah, I get that.
Right, so young people who can't drive, too young, elderly people who can't drive, handicapped people who can't drive, and for people who can drive, for me, I hate driving. Driving is wasted time. I could be doing things. I could be working. I could be relaxing. So it would be a great benefit to all of us when we don't have to drive and the machine does all the driving.
But why is there less of a focus right now? Because we haven't achieved that, and I think even
Yes.
Tesla recognizes that. So why is that not a first thing to make driving as safe as possible with this combination of have some autonomy, but also have the human involved to the point where they're still able to make some of those decisions, so that you're getting the best of both worlds until you make it the computer. I don't know.
Yeah. So you could design most of the technology so it's just assisting you. Just say no, don't do that. You're going to have an accident, right? Just be sitting there monitoring. That would make cars much safer, but would mean you wouldn't get some of the other benefits of autonomy, which are you get the time back. You would just get the safety benefits. And I mean, interesting enough, if you want, so a lot of what Tesla wants to do is just drive enough miles so it learns how to drive, right? Now, interestingly enough, they don't have to drive autonomously to do that. In fact, there's an argument they'll learn quicker if they don't drive autonomously. So if you're driving autonomously, you drive down the road and you make a mistake. Well, most of the time you make a mistake. I mean, when you as a human make a mistake, you get lucky, you don't die. All of us make lots of mistakes driving, and the other person swerves, or someone wasn't coming down the road the wrong way, and you survive. And you don't know that you got lucky. So in terms of machine learning, you don't get any feedback if you're driving down the road and you make mistakes and you don't get any, you only the feedback you get is catastrophic. Like, okay, now we made a mistake that crashed the car. Other than that, other people avoided you. It's very hard for you to see that you did the wrong thing and yet somehow nothing happened. So, but if you just sit there monitoring the car as a computer, watching what the human does, and you say, okay, I want to turn left here, and the human doesn't turn left, you say, oh, okay, that was a mistake. I can't turn left there. So the human gives you input all the time, which corrects what you would have done. And you can get instant feedback from, so you can actually learn to drive much quicker by observing a human than you can by driving yourself, because you get much more direct, immediate feedback than if you are just sitting there, not crashing, and only occasionally getting some feedback from the planet. You get feedback all the time from the driver as to what the driver thought was the good thing to be doing at that point. If that's not what you're doing, then you can learn that instantly. So there's an argument that actually Tesla could learn quicker if they didn't try and drive autonomously than if they do now, which is to provide autonomous driving.
It's more sexy for them to go.
It is, of course.
Thank you.
Is this on? Okay. We all agree that there are a lot of questions we need to answer, especially with autonomous car, like these ethical questions. Who do we kill if we have to choose someone? And such questions. Do you believe that we actually have the framework to work on these questions? Are there really people working on it? Because from the public side, for example, during the French election, it didn't really seem to be central to the public debate right now, even if for me, which is writing it feels really real and actual.
Well,
If we have this framework, do you believe that we do what we have to do to make the public aware of it? Because when you talk to random people who aren't really connected to the industry, they really have not any idea what's happening in this field. So,
well, so as I mentioned before, I think we have really good historical precedent here, which is aviation. Right? So I think the aviation industry gives us a good model to try and follow. So I think there's a good idea of how you should probably go about doing it. As to the public awareness, yes, you're right, the public is not aware, which is why I give talks like this, which is why I wrote my book, try and stimulate the debate, which is not a debate that technologists need to have, but the public needs to have. But I think people are starting to wake up to the idea. I mean, you said in the French election, it wasn't the case, but in the last British election, one of the parties, the Green Party, now the Green Party is not so big in the UK as it is here in Germany, or I don't know how big it is in France, but so it's still a small party. But as part of their manifesto, they had transitioning to UBI, the Universal Basic Income, as part of their political manifesto. So that's pretty mainstream, right? It actually is in the manifesto of one of the parties. I mean, they got 5-7% of the vote or something. But I was pretty surprised and pretty pleased to see that it was in mainstream politics, the idea that there's enough change going about that you should put in your manifesto transitioning to universal basic income as one of your pledges. Obviously, the Green Party never had a chance of winning the election, but the fact that it was there meant that people would say, well, okay, what is universal basic income? Why would we want to worry about universal basic income? Says to me that people, I think, are starting to think about these issues. And we really do need to think about these issues because Most of the major car manufacturers are talking about selling autonomous cars in the next 5 or 10 years. Ford have said 2021 they want to be selling on a fully autonomous car. So they're going to be, driving around within a decade. And in fact, you can buy something that drives autonomously down the highway today already. They're going to be, changing our lives, changing many aspects of our society very soon. Unlike the Industrial Revolution, this is going to happen probably quicker. In the Industrial Revolution, you had to build big, expensive steam engines and bits of machinery. That took time and money and capital. This time, you just need to copy bits of code. That takes no time, that takes no money, that takes no capital, right? It's almost free to copy code. And then the other thing that people forget is how quickly machines can learn compared to humans. It's something I didn't talk about, which is that we're used to learning things all ourselves, right? So if you learn to ride a bicycle, it doesn't help that I've learned to ride a bicycle, right? I can say to you, well, get on the bicycle and pedal and move the handlebars. But you're going to have to learn it pretty much from scratch yourself, right? Whereas computers, well, if I've written the code that learned to ride a bicycle over here, I just have to copy the code over there. It takes no time at all to share that learning on another computer. And so you can learn on a planet-wide scale. Every night, Tesla updates its software by learning from every other Tesla. We're used to learning everything ourselves. And it's slow and painful. We don't learn planet-wide. If we could learn planet-wide, we'd all speak every language on the planet. We'd all play musical instruments as well as anyone else on the planet. All our skills would be ratcheting up as well as everyone else. This is why we're going to be surprised how quickly it happens. Because as soon as one computer learns something, we can share it with every computer. And we only have to learn it once. It's never forgotten. So it's going to surprise us. Computers can learn so much better, so much quicker than we can learn. And that's something that we're not used to. It's not human-like scale. It's going to be completely alien to us.
Okay. Hi. Thanks for the talk. Multiple times during your talk and during QA, you talked about the black box that is machine learning in a lot of cases. And I remember in your talk you said we don't understand what's going on there yet. So I've got two questions. The first is, how likely do you think we're going to get to a point where we say, okay, we understand what's going on in a deep learning algorithm? And the second question is, if we don't get to that point where we understand it, do you see it as a problem?
So it's a wonderful question. We don't know. Honestly, don't know. I mean, we might build intelligence. We might make these machines, and they behave intelligently. They do all the right things, and we have no insight as to how they work. And there's good precedent for this, which is ourselves. We have no idea how our human brain works, and maybe we'll never work out the magic of our human brain. Maybe we're not smart enough to know how smart our brains are, right? So we may end up building intelligence. So this would be like the worst, one of the more depressing outcomes for AI. We may end up building intelligence, and it will be just as black box as our human brains are, right? Which I have to take what you say on trust as you look like me, you're behaving smartly, you're doing all the right things, so presumably what you're doing is okay. So maybe we end up building intelligence like that. Maybe we will get insight. It's a completely open question. We don't know. Interesting. So if you go to Singapore, they're trialing autonomous taxis in Singapore. The company that's doing that is doing it in a different way to Google and Uber, which are doing it with machine learning. They've got a different architecture. So at the bottom level, the perception level, perceiving the environment, working out what's going on in the world, is machine learning. But the top level, the control architecture of their car, is fuzzy logic. It's a set of rules. It's fuzzy because actually road traffic rules are not precise, right? You are allowed to cross over the white line to overtake and to avoid accidents. You are allowed to speed to overtake. You are allowed to go through yellow lights if it's going to cause an accident. So they're not. People quickly discovered that the road traffic rules are not exact rules, but there is some interpretation. So they've written the rules in fuzzy logic so that they can inspect them. And if the car has an accident or does something it isn't supposed to do, they can say, well, where's the rule for that? And if there isn't a rule for that, they write another rule. And so that they can have guarantees, and so there is some more transparency. The top level architecture is one that they actually hand code with rules. And so maybe we'll end up building systems more like that, where to guarantee the behaviors, we actually write down explicit rules, and then we can be sure that it's following those rules. And maybe we leave the machine learning just for the sort of things like perception, where machine learning is really superb at.
Thanks.
They're behind you now.
Hi. Yeah. I very much liked the point that you brought about companies like so big like Apple, Google, and so on, that they have interest, that they are not aligned with society. So basically, that they are not paying their taxes, and so on. So and then you have these companies building this AI and this kind of thing. So how don't you have the feeling that it's a bit of an educational problem, that these companies...
A bit of a what sort of problem?
Education problem. So that the people who are like leading these companies don't want to talk with the rest of the society, and that they're, I don't know, only interested in their own, I don't know, let's say benefit. So how could we align the interests of society and the interests of those companies so that they pay taxes, so that they build an AI in the direction that we wanna have it? Do you have any ideas? How could we? Yeah,
again, it's a fantastic question. It's more than just an education problem, right? These people went to good universities, had liberal educations, right? But it's not clear to me anymore that the corporate structure, which is there to maximize, supposedly to maximize shareholder value, it's not even clear it's maximizing shareholder value. It seems to be maximizing CEO pay, really, more than anything else at the moment. But okay, it's maximizing shareholder value. Whether that aligns anymore with society. So you've got to remember, corporations are artificial constructs that we make as society. There's no necessity that they exist in the form they do. We invented this legally, this legal structure. They are allowed to commit manslaughter. There's corporate manslaughter. They're a legal entity like humans that act in our world with certain rights and responsibilities. They get immense freedoms to act, right? They have limited liability, which is an immense freedom. They have much less liability than you and me. If they lose all their money, they can, they can walk away from everything. Whereas there are certain debts that you and I can't walk away from. So that gives them a great ability to act, to generate wealth, and to do things. And with that freedom should come responsibility. And there are some responsibilities, but it's not clear to me that we're necessarily demanding enough responsibility out of companies anymore. And that that they play these games about paying tax in low tax states or in no tax states, which do not align with the fact that they are acting in our society, benefiting from the education system, the road system, the healthcare system, all the things that allow them to act and to charge money for their products, all paid for by the state and by other people. Therefore they have a responsibility to ensure that carries on. I'm not an economist, I'm not a lawyer at the end of the day, but it seems to me, you can certainly look and you say, well, look at what happens in Scandinavia, where they have, where they have boards of companies which are more representative of workers. There are other structures you can have, and there are other ways of forming corporations. We used to have more cooperatives, which were more aligned to the benefits of the workers. So it seems to me there are lots of ideas that we could try and borrow, and maybe ultimately I think we have to reconsider the idea of corporation. That it gets freedom to act, but maybe it has to be realigned. It worked pretty well for the Industrial Revolution, but now in this globalized world where taxes seem to get paid nowhere, maybe we have to come back and reconsider how corporations should be allowed to act.
Global taxes. Global taxes.
I'm not sure, what we're prepared to accept, but there are other solutions. More purchase taxes. There are There are lots of things that, you know, these are big questions. I mean, I'm a technologist. I'm not an economist, a lawyer, or a taxation expert, but it seems to me that it's not just technical problems, but these are very fundamental issues to. It's worth pointing out, look, when the Industrial Revolution changed and corporations really started, we didn't really have, you know, corporations only really started to get hold when we had an industrial society. There were very few corporations that existed pre the Industrial Revolution. There are a few Italian banks and a few publishing houses, but there's not much that predates the Industrial Revolution in terms of corporations. So the corporation is very much a product of the Industrial Revolution. But we changed society in fundamental ways when the Industrial Revolution happened. We introduced unions, we introduced labor laws, child labor laws, we introduced bank holidays, we introduced lots of things to protect the rights of workers, to make sure that Karl Marx was wrong, that it wasn't just the owners of production that benefited, but all of us shared that prosperity. And it seems to me we're perhaps going through a similar change where only the very wealthy, the owners of the robots will prosper, only the big tech companies will prosper, unless we more forcibly redistribute the wealth and make sure that all of us share the prosperity. And that's actually necessary if our economies are to grow, because rich corporations don't, you know, trickle their wealth downwards.